Okay, welcome back. So when we left off, we had the FK arms already set up and good to go. So what we need to do is start working on the IK arms. In order to do that, just to make the scene a little bit more, a little less cluttered, I want to select the left and right shoulder control buffers and hit Control H to hide those. And then these are the FK shoulders. I'm going to select the right and left FK shoulders and hide those. And I'm going to select the right and left IK shoulders and show those with Control with Shift H. Okay, so these are the IK shoulder joints, and we are going to now set up the IK setup for these arms. So if you remember from the legs, we ran an IK handle, a rotate plane IK handle from the hip down to the ankle. Now, if we ran an IK handle from the shoulder to the wrist, we're going to run into an issue. So let me show you what I mean. So we're going to go to Skeleton, Create IK Handle, make sure that I'm in Rotate Plane Solver again, because I'm simulating a ball and socket joint here that's going to have an elbow that I'd like to be able to control. So I'm going to go to the Rotate Plane Solver. That way I can have pole vectors. So I'm going to click on shoulder and then wrist. And that's going to make me a new IK handle here. If I select it and move it, see what happens here. Look at what's happening at the forearm. We're getting bending at the forearm like a second elbow. So that is not what I want, obviously. So I'm going to delete that IK handle. Okay. The way that I get around this, I need my IK handle to be at the wrist, but I don't want to have any bending between the elbow and the wrist, which is what happens when you run the IK handle straight from the shoulder to the wrist. So how do we fix that? The way that we fix it is we're going to go back to the IK handle, rotate plane solver. I'm going to run it from the shoulder to the forearm this time. And you'll see if I move it, my forearm stays perfectly straight with the arm. But the problem is my IK handle is not where I need it to be. I need it to be down here at the wrist, not at the forearm. So how do I get it there? So I'm going to select this forearm joint, and you see if I come in here, I have an effector underneath that forearm. And if I select that effector and hold down D and V and then middle mouse drag and snap that effector to the wrist, you see that my IK handle goes with it. So the effector is kind of like a target for the IK handle. The IK handle tries to follow the effector as much as possible to get the IK style motion. So as soon as I move the effector, the IK handle goes with it. So now if I select the IK handle and move it, what do we get here? We get a perfectly straight forearm. No matter how I move it, I get that perfectly straight forearm. So that's what we want. So we're going to call this left wrist IK. So that's our left wrist IK joint. Let's do the same on the right side. Again, we're going to go to Skeleton, Create IK Handle, Rotate Plane Solver, Shoulder to Forearm. Okay, select the forearm joint, find that effector, which is right there. Hold down D and V to snap that effector to the wrist. And now if you select the IK handle and move it, you'll see that we get a straight arm on that side. So we're going to call this right wrist IK. Okay, so that is how you set those up so that you don't get bending at the forearm, and that's how that works. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is make a stabilizer IK handle. So what's a stabilizer IK handle? Basically what happens is if you just have the single IK handle at the wrist, when you plant a character's hand and then their body moves, what happens is you might get a little bit of rolling and movement in that hand even though you don't want it to be there. So I use a second IK handle between the wrist and the palm joint to stabilize the arm. So let's go ahead and make that. Skeleton, go to IK handle options and change this to single chain solver. And we're going to run this from the wrist here. Hold on. Let's try that again. So Skeleton, Create IK Handle, Single Chain Solver. I'm going to run it from the wrist to the palm. There it is right there. Run this again. Create IK Handle, wrist to palm. Okay. So we're going to name the first one left stabilizer IK. And I'm just going to copy this to here and change the L to an R. Right stabilizer IK. Okay, so that will stabilize the hand. Now, obviously we need a control, just like we put a control at the feet, we need a control at the hand. So what I'm going to do for that is use my NURBS, my curve box here. So I'm going to duplicate it with Control D. I'm going to take this duplicate and I'm going to snap it with V to that wrist joint. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I need to orient it to the wrist, so I'm going to select the wrist, select the control, and constrain orient. Now you'll see that it's angled along the wrist as I expect it to be. But what I need to do is open it up and get rid of that constraint, because now that it's aligned, I don't need the constraint. So I'm going to go to control vertex mode here, and I might actually bring back my character here just so we have a reference. So I'm going to move those points there. I'm going to move these 2 points. So maybe move these down, you know, something like that. And maybe scale them this way. Take these 4 and scale them this way. Maybe do a little bit of that here. Okay, so just get an arm control that works for you, makes sense for you. And so I'm going to go with this right here. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect it. Hit Control G to make an empty group. I'm going to call this, well, first I need to name the control itself. So this is left IK arm control. And I'm going to copy that name and plug it into this group here, and then put buffer on the end of it. And what I'm going to do is take that buffer and snap it to the wrist. So hit W, middle mouse, hit W, then hold on V and middle mouse click it there. Once it's there, I'm going to freeze transformations on it. And now I need to align the buffer to the wrist joint. So select the wrist joint, control click the buffer, constrain, orient. See, now that I'm oriented, I don't need the constraint anymore, so I can open that and delete it. Now that the buffer is aligned and the arm control is aligned, if I take the arm control and middle mouse drag it under the buffer, you'll see that I have this. My rotates get zeroed out. Now I need to get rid of these values here, and I can do that by simply freezing transformations. Let's save our file right here. Okay, so I have a buffer and I have an arm control. Something that we're going to do a little bit extra for the arm control is to put in a gimbal control. So what is a gimbal control? I want to make a new polygon cube here. I'm going to zoom in on it here. Then I'm going to activate my rotate tool. I'm going to hold down the E key and then hold down the left mouse button and go to gimbal. And what is gimbal mode? You'll see that with this cube now I have 3 axes of rotation. I have 1, 2, and 3. Okay, but if I take this and I rotate it this way, you'll see that these 2 axes, the red one and the blue one, which is the X and the Z, they start to sort of get to the same position here. So now I have lost an axis of rotation. I can't rotate this cube this way because I have lost that by rotating around the Y-axis. Okay, so that is gimbal lock. I'm in gimbal lock. If I need to rotate this cube forward this way, I won't be able to do that because I have lost that axis of rotation. So that is what gimbal lock is. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to set my tool back to object mode just so we can use it that way. So I'm going to make an extra control in here. I'm going to call it the gimbal control. So what I can do is basically just duplicate this guy. So select him and Control D, duplicate it, and then just scale it. And if we want to, we can adjust actual control points here. So maybe scale this way. It doesn't really matter what you do. So let's go this way and select this guy and this guy. And maybe scale. I missed one. There we go. And I missed that guy too. Okay, and we're going to call this, maybe I make it a little bit wider. We're going to call this left here. Left gimbal control. And we can freeze transformations on that. So this is going to allow you to be able to regain that axis of rotation that you lost using the gimbal control. Okay, maybe scale it up this way. Freeze transformations. Okay, so that's our left gimbal control. So we got our buffer here with two controls underneath it. We're going to take that gimbal control and put it under the IK arm control. Okay, so this is what we want right here. Okay, so in order to mirror this over to the other side, I'm going to hit Control G to group it to itself, Control D to duplicate it, and then in the duplicate, I'm going to set the scale X to -1. Okay, so what that's going to do, did that not go? Oh, -1, not 0, -1. There we go. Okay, so that should theoretically, oh, you know what? So now that we have that, I'm going to take this second one here. I'm going to go to modify, search, and replace names. I want to have it search for R, replace it with search for L, replace it with R, replace, and select both of those and Shift P. And then we can delete these two groups in here. So I have my right side here, which should line up perfectly with the right wrist joint. Okay, and if we open up this and select the arm control, and then I should look in there and find no values, it should be zeroed out. Okay, save your work as we go. So we need to change the colors of this to match the color scheme that we have going here. So I'm going to select my well, I'll start with the gimbal control and go to attribute editor, go to enable overrides, and let's make it that nice red. Select the arm control, do the same thing right there. Let's go to this side, do the same thing. Select the gimbal control, make it that green color or whatever color it is that you chose to use. And there we go. Okay, so we're now matched up to the color scheme. Now that we have our controls, what we need to do is take these two IK handles, that one and that one that we made, and put them under, so let's open up the left side here, put these under the gimbal control. And what that's going to do, if I select my arm control and move it, you'll see that I have full control of that arm by doing that. And let's do the same thing on this side. I'm going to select this IK handle and this IK handle and put them under the right gimbal control. And if I select the right IK arm control and move it, you see that I have IK control over that arm. All right. So that is what we need to happen there. The next thing we need to do is make some pole vectors so we can control where this elbow is facing. Now with arms down at a 45-degree angle like we have here, it's going to be hard to keep that pole vector planar with the arms. So what I'm going to do is show you a little trick here that I learned on I think it was a Noman workshop video, but this guy showed a little way that you can set up your pole vector to keep them planar with the arm. So I'm going to go to my modeling menu set here, and I'm going to go to mesh display, or I'm sorry, mesh tools, and go to create polygons. So what this tool does is you basically create a polygon by setting down vertex points. I'm going to hold down V for point snapping and snap one point to the shoulder, snap one to the elbow, and snap the last one to the wrist and hit enter. So that creates a three-sided polygon for me. And the thing about three-sided polygons is that they're always going to be planar, right? When you have three sides, you're always planar. So by default, if I activate my move tool, you'll see that the pivot point is down at the origin. So I'm just going to go to modify, and I'm going to go to center pivot just to get the pivot up to where we need it here. Then I need the pivot to sort of line up with this edge on this side here. I want to hold down D and C and sort of drag it close and then release and then hold down D and C again. And you'll see now I slide up and down that edge right there. So I'm gonna sort of line this up, get it level with the elbow. Doesn't have to be exact, but get it close. And then I'm going to scale this polygon like this. Okay, scale it to get this corner here that used to be at the elbow, get it nice and far from the elbow. Okay, when you have that there, now that corner is telling us where to put the pole vector. So I'm just going to use, for this, I'm going to use the curve sphere. So Control D to duplicate it. I'm going to activate my move tool and snap it to that corner. Now we could probably make it smaller just so it's not so huge. And we're going to call this left arm PV and freeze transformations on it. So now it's zeroed out. So we can get rid of our polygon here, and we know that this pole vector is placed perfectly. Then the next thing I'm going to do is just go in the attribute editor on the transform node and switch this to our red color. Okay, save your work. So I'm going to take left arm PV, I'm going to group it to itself. Then I'm going to duplicate that group, and on that duplicate group, I'm going to set scale X to -1. And that should give us that pole vector right there. Okay, and then I'm going to switch this one here to right arm PV. And then I can pull these both out of their groups by hitting Shift P and then deleting those groups. Make sure on the right side that you freeze transformation so we get rid of all those values. And then the way that we set up our pole vector is select the pole vector control and then shift select the the wrist IK handle and go to your rigging menu set here, constrain pole vector, and let's do the same side. Select the pole vector control first, select the wrist IK handle and constrain pole vector. So if I select my pole vector here and move it up and down, you can see that elbow moves along with it. Let's do the other side. Move this up and down and that elbow goes with it. Okay, so save your work right there because we have it working the way that we need it to work. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is set up our wrist twisting. Now, if you remember, we did that in the FK setup. We need to set up something similar here. So we're going to go into Windows. We're going to go into Node Editor, and I'm going to just use the same thing that we have here for the. So we had a wrist twist here, and I lost my nodes, but that's no big deal. You know what, I might as well just get rid of this node here. So we have a wrist twist tab here. So I'm going to select my wrist control here, and I'm going to select my forearm joint, and I'm going to bring those both in here. And okay, so for some reason our nodes came back. Okay, so there we go. So we have our arm control, then we have our forearm joint right here. So again, we need to divide the value by 2. And since we already did that in the FK side here, I'm going to select this multiply divide node. And if, again, operation is divide, input 2 is 2. And I'm going to hit Control D, and I'm going to undo that. Let's make sure I unlock the window here. Then hit Control D and then bring that copy here. And we're going to call this left arm, left IK arm div. Oh, let's get rid of this one on the end of here. Ooh. Let's make sure we fix that. Okay. So that's our multiply divide node. It's set to divide with an input 2 of 2. So let's open up the rotates, open up the inputs here, and open up the rotates on the IK form. So we're going to take the rotate X value, plug it into input 1X, take the output X value, plug it into the rotate X here, and then get our 2 conversion nodes. This one goes here, and this one goes here. Okay, so what should happen is if I rotate this 40 degrees in X, I should get a 20-degree rotation in the form, which I do. Okay, so we have our wrist twisting working pretty well here. Let's do the right side. Select the wrist arm control, select the forearm joint, and we are going to add that to the graph here, move it down here. Let's separate our nodes here. So I'm going to just duplicate this guy here, Control D, and move this guy down here. And we're going to call this right IK arm divide. Okay, let's open up the rotates, input 1s, open up the rotates on this side, and the outputs. So rotate X goes into input 1X, output X goes to rotate X, and then we can grab our 2 conversion nodes. This one goes here, this one goes here. Let's go ahead and test it. Let's rotate this about 50 degrees. This should be about 25 something. It is. I'm going to zero these controls back on here, so zero that guy out here, and select this one and zero this guy out. So one thing that we need to do is just select both of these IK handles, select all 4 IK handles, and hit Control H to hide them because we don't need to see them. Okay, then the next thing we need to do is make a clavicle control. Now we have a single clavicle on each side. We need to have a control that will rotate the clavicle as we need to. So this is used for like shrugging your shoulders like that, or just when you raise your arm past a certain point, then you got to start bringing in some clavicle rotation. So we need to have controls back there to control the rotation of the clavicle. Okay, so let's make a different kind of control. So I'm going to go to curves and surfaces and activate my circle control. I'm just going to hold on X and just move it out here where it's out of the way. And I want to set my scales to 2. Just so it's nice and big. And then I'm going to get my EP curve tool here. And I'm going to, with holding down X to grid snap, I'm going to click here. Let's see, how do we want to do this? I'm going to click over here, 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 and back down there. Hit enter. That's going to make an arrow. Again, I was holding down X for grid snapping. So I'm going to then activate my move tool and hold down D and V and snap the pivot to this, D and X, and snap the pivot to the center of this grid point right here. So D and X and snap. Then I'm going to duplicate this and rotate it 90 degrees. And now that I'm looking at it, I think these arrows are going to be too big. So let's redo the arrow here. Again, EP curve tool, hold down X, click there, go up further, click there, This might be a little big, but let's see. Click, click, click. And there and there. Okay, we'll see how this works, if we like it or not. Again, activate your move tool, hold down D and X, and snap it to that grid point right there. Duplicate it, Control D. Rotate, hold down J, and rotate in the Y so that it snaps to 90-degree increments. Duplicate it again, hold down J, rotate in Y 90 degrees. Duplicate again, hold down J, and rotate 90 degrees. Okay, so now we need to combine all this stuff into a single control. So what are we going to do? Let's go in the modeling section here. We have a curves menu here, so I'm going to select my circle and that first arrow. I'm going to go to curves, and I'm going to cut. Is that the right one? Yes, cut is the right one. What that does, it's every point where these curves intersect, it's going to split the curve. So I'm going to delete this section here. I'm going to delete that section and that section. Okay, so again, select this circle, select this arrow, go to curves and cut. And that's going to split my curve, so delete these sections here and here. Then again, select this circle here, this arrow, surfaces, and no, not surfaces, curves, cut, delete this middle section, delete these and this. So then select this guy, select this arrow, curves, cut, delete that, delete that. Delete that. So basically, you see what we have here. We have a circle with arrows coming out of it, but everything is sort of separated right now. So we need to combine all this stuff. So I'm going to go, let's see, do I select two pieces? And I'm going to go to attach, and I'm going to go in the options here. And I'm just going to go to connect, and I'm going to turn off keep originals and hit apply. So what that did is it combine these into one curve. I'm going to delete history, so edit, delete by type history, or Alt-Shift-D is the shortcut. Then I'm going to select this and hit apply there, Alt-Shift-D to delete history. Select this and this, hit apply, Alt-Shift-D to delete history. This, hit apply, Alt-Shift-D, delete history. This guy and this guy, hit apply, Alt-Shift-D. This guy and this guy, apply, Alt-Shift-D, this guy and this guy, apply, Alt-Shift-D, and what I should be left with is a single curve with arrows coming out of it. Okay, so that is how you would make some of these fancier controls here, and then we can scale it down back to 1 to make it smaller, and there we go. So I'm going to duplicate this guy, and I'm going to take the duplicate and snap it to the, actually I should snap it to the clavicle right there. Okay, I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to hold down G and rotate 90 degrees in X. And then I'm going to move it back a little bit. So if I bring back my character here, I just want it to be back here somewhere. And I'm going to scale it down because it's really big right now. So just scale it down to something manageable. And modify and freeze transformations just to get it cleaned up. And we're going to call this left clavicle control. Okay, I'm going to hide the character here. So I'm going to hold down D and V. So D and V, and I'm going to snap the pivot point to the clavicle joint. Then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to move it over to this side. And I'm going to call this one right clavicle control and freeze its transformations. Modify, freeze. There we go. And so now we can change the colors to, again, going with our control scheme here. And make this red there, and make this one green there. Okay, so those are our clavicle controls, and again, you got to make sure that the centers, the pivot points for these controls are at the clavicle joints. Okay, so I'm going to select my left clavicle control here. I'm going to hit Control G to group it to itself, and I'm going to hold on D and V and snap, hold on D and V, snap the pivot to the clavicle. Do the same on the right side, Control G to group it to itself. Activate my move tool, hold on D and V, and middle mouse drag until the pivot snaps to the clavicle joint. So if we go down here and open these up, you'll see I'm going to copy and paste that into the group, and then just put buffer on the end of it. I'm going to do the same thing, copy this, paste that in there, and call that buffer. Now, what we might have to do actually is select both of those controls and Shift P to get them out of their buffers. So what we need to do is align the buffers to the clavicle joint. And if we do that with the controls in there, they're going to get moved from this position. So we took them out. So select the clavicle joint. This is the left clavicle, so I'm going to select the left clavicle control buffer. And I'm going to go in my rigging menu set, constrain, and do an orient. You see that it's aligned perfectly. Delete that constraint. And this time on this side, select the right clavicle, select the right clavicle control buffer, constrain, orient, and that's going to align it. So just like we expect, that's aligned that way. So wait a minute, my alignment is wrong. Let me try that again on this side. So I'm going to select this joint, which is the right bind clavicle, select the right clavicle control buffer and do a constraint. And I think we had orient. Yep, we need to make sure we reset the settings because when we did the wrist, we had set it to Y and Z. So we need to make sure we reset settings and then hit add. And now we have the correct orientations. And let's go ahead and do the other side again. So select the joint, select the clavicle buffer, constrain, orient. Now we're in business. Okay. And with those constrained, we can now put the controls inside of their buffers, and then we can freeze transformations. So modify, freeze transformations on the controls. Save your file. Okay. Now once we've done that, now we can select the control and select the joint and constrain, orient, control, joint, constrain, orient. Okay, so if I select the control now and rotate it, you'll see that it rotates my clavicle joint. Same on this side, rotates my clavicle joint. Okay, the next thing that we have to do is select the control, and because this controls only ever rotate, I'm going to lock everything but the rotate channel. So select them all, lock and hide selected. Do the same on the other side. Lock and hide selected. And then at the buffer level so I'm going to select both of these buffers and I'm going to lock and hide everything. Actually, no, before I do that, don't want to forget this step. So in order to get these controls to move with the character, I need to constrain those buffers to the spine joint, right? So I'm going to select the spine joint, select the left control buffer, and I'm going to go to constrain parent. Then again, select the same spine joint, select right control buffer, constrain, and parent. Okay, so now if I was to say rotate this, you'll see that my clavicle controls go along for the ride. Okay, now with those buffers constrained, I can select both of them and then lock and hide everything on those buffers. Save your work. Okay, so at this point, we have the IK set up. We have the clavicle controls set up. If we bring back the character, you'll see that the clavicle controls are back there. But when we want to affect the clavicle rotation, we can just use those clavicle controls. Okay, so we have IK set up, we have FK set up, we have clavicle control set up. The next thing we need to do is set up the IK-FK switching, and we will do that in the next video. So this is what we have now, and we are moving along quite nicely. So if you like the content, again, like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if there's anything that you want me to expand on, etc., etc., and that is what we have. So I will see you in the next video.